Gaeilge Cháirde. Welcome to the Bitesize Irish podcast. If you're listening as a podcast or indeed on YouTube, Gaeilge Cháirde, I've got a special guest today, Niall Ó Siadhail, and he's the learning content developer here at Bitesize Irish. And we've been undergoing pretty big project with him over the last few months, something that we're going to be launching in the next couple of weeks or next week when this goes out. So I've been really looking forward to getting what we've been working on out there for people who want to learn the Irish language and people who have already been learning the Irish language and people who are coming back to Gaeilge as well. So we'll be chatting to Niall and away we go. So Niall, Fáilte, Isteach, chuna sa tátu?
Tá go maith gur maithagid. Great to be here.
Great to be here. It's the first time for us to be speaking in English together. But as
Yes.
Emma at Bitesize Irish said before, you have to let out your English bits as well. So Niall, Fáilte, Isteach. Niall, you've been with Bitesize Irish for a good few months now. So you're part of the team. Where are you from and where are you based?
Well, I'm from County Tyrone in Ulster originally, from a village called Gaeltacht, and that's where I grew up. But I have lived in Dublin and London for the last 20 years, and I'm in Dublin again, settled in Dublin again, thankfully now.
Cool. So I'd like to share a little bit of background to people of like who you are, what your story is around the Irish language. So for people watching and listening to this, Niall has taught Irish in London for a good bit of time. He does so in Dublin now. He's got a bachelor's in, I've got it written down, Old Irish and Folklore, and a master's in Early and Medieval Irish. And he also has a qualification in the translation of Irish, which is very important, because there you're basically certified that you have the accuracy in the Irish language grammar, to be able to translate texts, I suppose, usually from English into Irish. That would be the normal, I guess, commercial direction, right? So Niall, why is the Irish language part of your life to such a big extent?
It's hard to say, really. Because I'm from the north, we didn't have Irish at primary school. So, and because there were some extra classes at primary school, so I actually had a little bit of French by the time I started my secondary school. And I can remember my attitude was, oh, I'm looking forward to French. I know a bit about that. I don't care about this Irish. I'm not interested in that. But actually, within a week, that had flipped completely. And I can't really tell you why, but as soon as our Irish classes started, I felt very comfortable with it, and I felt more comfortable, almost like I recognized it in a way, which maybe I do from the way people speak English where I'm from, or other parts of the country where I have family. It's hard to say exactly, but just very quickly I felt completely like I'd found my subject, if you like, and so it was always my best subject at school after that. And as you've said, I continued studying that at university. So it just took a hold of me, I suppose, at that time, and here I am.
So I'm interested, you come from a different context than me. I grew up in County Clare. I've spent half my life in Limerick. I've never lived in Northern Ireland or the 6 counties, or however you might refer to it. So let's say back in primary school, Niall, was the Irish language even on your radar or in your family's background, or where was the Irish language in relation to you growing up?
No, it wasn't on my radar really, especially primary school it wasn't, because we didn't have it at school. And we didn't have TG Cahir, or Tina G started 25 or 26 years ago now, but when I was in primary school, it wasn't there. So there wasn't that much. A little bit of news on RTE was in Irish, as it still is. But my family was always very interested in Irish culture. Gaelic games were big, Gaelic football and hurling, which you don't hear often from Tyrone people, and traditional music for sure. But also, my mother's from Galway, from Western Connemara, so we had that direct connection. For us, crossing the border wasn't, well, there was no border for us really. It was equally home in Galway as it was in Dublin or anywhere else we went. So possibly in our house more than other houses in the neighborhood, in the region, we had very close links, and we were used to watching RTE as much, if not more, than BBC. So didn't have a lot of it around, but you know, then as I go on, I can see that, oh yeah, we were quite plugged in a way. And yeah, as I said, my mother's from Connemara. Sadly, it wasn't Gaeltacht area when she was growing up, but I was looking at some maps, and around the time my grandparents were born, it was a Gaeltacht area, and they did have Irish themselves. But when I knew them, I was quite young, and I didn't have much Irish, and anyway, our dialects were quite different anyway.
Yeah,
the old problem.
The good old Gaeilge Ulla that you have, and if you haven't seen it on YouTube, find our live Q&A that Neil recorded with Emma, I think, on Ulster Irish. So good episode there to look back on. So Neil, you did you had Irish at school. What was the attitude to Irish at school? Like, was it something to be embarrassed about, to be interested in?
Well, we've a very particular context and where I come from in County Tyrone and in the 6 counties, where the people who do study Irish are really take it to heart, I suppose, because it's not, a little bit more now, but it wasn't on the road signs, and it wasn't something that was supported by government, local or national in the UK. So you really felt you had to cling on to your own culture like that. So that was a part of it. But at the same time, there were the same attitudes like, oh, Irish is useless and you won't be able to get a good job if you've got Irish and things like this. And I really remember friends of mine, when we came to 14, we had to choose a language at school for GCSE. Will we do French or will we do Irish? And it never really happened that people would do 2 languages at that point, which is an awful shame. And I can remember a lot of my friends saying, well, I'm going to do French because it's more useful. And of all of my friends, I don't think any of them speaks a word of French.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Professionally or socially.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they'll come back to it. I'm not sure. But, you know, I'm not sure how important French was to them in the end either.
Interesting. And going into university, then you obviously took the arts and Irish language approach. I'm interested in the kind of old Irish.
Yeah.
Like that was your master's, early in medieval Irish.
Yeah, that's basically a master's in Old Irish. That's what's going on.
In Old Irish. So what is Old Irish like to study? I mean, do you see the direct mappings of how the language works today, or is it like studying an ancient language that you don't see resemblance to?
Yeah, well, first of all, it might seem like a strange choice, but I didn't go directly to university thinking I'm getting rid of modern Irish, let's study Old Irish. What happened was I went to UCD, and in first year in UCD, we usually do, in an arts degree, you usually do 3 subjects, and then afterwards you might narrow it down a little. So in first year, I chose modern Irish, naturally, and some other subjects that were related to that. So I chose, one of them was Old Irish. And it just happened, I really loved it. Again, a bit unexpectedly, I just really got on well with it. And I ended up focusing on that one more than modern Irish. But Old Irish, it's recognizably Irish. You know, if you look at it, you wouldn't be in any doubt. But it is different. It's not so easy to just read. If you feel comfortable with modern Irish, doesn't mean you'll be able to read Old Irish. There are certain tricks in the spelling. So words that we would recognize today are just a little bit different. For example, the word far, man, F-E-R, spelled F-E-R in Old Irish, fair, and that later became far. So if you don't know that little trick, and that pattern repeats with other words as well. So if you're not sure about that, it would look more different. But once you know those tricks, you can spot a lot of nouns very easily. The verbs, however, are very different. The verbs are completely different. So it's the same language, it's just an older form, and the Old Irish period itself is roughly 800 AD until about 1000 or 1100 AD. Basically, when the Vikings came around that time, that started to unsettle the country, and then the language was went into another phase, went into Middle Irish, which is in the centuries after that. But basically, we're talking about 1,000 years ago.
Wow. And do you see like those patterns? Does it help you understand modern Irish? Like, were there instances where you were studying a word in Old Irish and you're like, that's why it's like that?
Yeah, sure. One little example I can give is something in Old Irish we call the perfect particle, which was ro, R-O, ro. And that would be put into verbs in order to put it into the past tense and so on. But we still have the remnants of that in the past tense in modern Irish, because in the present tense we say an gurren to ishke I the chudge cafe. Do you put ishke? An gurren to banya I the chudge cafe would be more sensible. Do you put milk in your coffee? But in the past tense, to, did you put? And instead of an, we have and that little r is the last remnant of the perfect particle ra. So that's common. You see that in near, gur, nar in the past tense, and that's a little trace of that.
Interesting. Niall, I'm going to jump. You were teaching Irish in London for how long?
Well, I guess I'd been living in London, and I'd ended up teaching English as a foreign language, and then I went to London. Yeah, I have to offset my Saxon footprint now after years of teaching English. But I went to London, as people do, to see the world, really, and to meet other people and all of that. So there was a time when I wasn't speaking much Irish, and it wasn't really so central in my life. But then I heard about this thing, the pop-up Gaeltacht, and that was possibly about 5 years ago now. And I thought, that's a great idea. It's there's no pressure. It seems like something something youthful and new and innovative and simple. So through the pop-up Gaeltacht in London, I met a bunch of great people who speak Irish, and then I thought, well, I've been teaching English. Maybe I could. These skills are just easily transferable, and I can move into teaching Irish. So that's what happened with me, really. So I was maybe 2 or 3 years in London teaching Irish in places like the London Irish Centre, and there's an adult learning institute called CityLit in the centre of London that do all sorts of languages and other skills, any kind of evening class you might want. So I was teaching Irish in these places, and then I really felt like for the first time, my professional and academic life would come together, and it all made sense. Now it looks like a plan. There was no plan, but it looked quite sensible now.
Yeah, looks very planned. Yeah, fair play to you. So you came across people, adults who wanted to learn the Irish language. So for me, that's really important. For Irish language learners who are watching or listening to this, we're at Bitesize Irish developing content and services to help you learn to speak Gaeilge. And we have to put ourselves in your shoes and see what do you need? What's holding you back? How can we better help you to learn and practice the Irish language? So Neil, what kind of backgrounds? I think you told me before that it was quite like a varied, diverse background of people who were learning the Irish
Yeah,
language you came across in London. Is that it?
absolutely. Yeah. So there were Irish people who were born and grown up in Ireland, and there are there are people from the north who had Irish at school, like me, and there are people who didn't have Irish at school. And so some of them were total beginners, some of them were higher level. But then there are lots of people who'd grown up in Britain who had varying levels of experience with the Irish language. There are people who are very connected to Ireland. Maybe they have very close family members there. And there are people with a little bit more distant connections. And there are a few international people too, people from Hungary and Germany and that. And it's always lovely to see that, because it's not just a family connection for them. It's just a more of a cultural thing. But the thing that I loved, especially after teaching English for years, is that there's a measure when you're teaching English as a foreign language. There's a measure of it being where a lot of people are doing it because they have to. Maybe their parents send them to do it and they don't really want to do it, or it's part of their ambitions to do an international business degree, or they just need it, but they're not there for the love of it always. Some of them are, sure, but you do get some kind of teenagers and young people who don't really care, they just have to do it. And I've never had that with Irish at all. It's amazing. It's beautiful to see how passionate everybody is and the love everyone has for the culture and the language and everything. So it's a really different experience as a teacher, and motivation is one of the biggest things for anybody who wants to learn a language, because the language is not easy and it doesn't happen in a day. So the motivation is really, really key. And yeah, so we had a real mix in London. Most people had at least Irish family connections. But we had everyone from people from the Gaeltacht and people who were very confident speakers down to people who were complete beginners. So that was the wide range in London. But that's what London's like. There's always a wide range of everything.
Interesting. And we'll come back maybe to your advice for Irish language learners, people starting Irish who are actively learning or indeed coming back to the Irish language. You've got a wealth of experience there. Neil, you're the founder of Nuacht Mhall, or Nuacht Mhall. What is that?
Nuacht Mhall is a podcast, and it means slow news. I believe the concept, I didn't invent the concept now. Someone told me about it. I've never listened to other ones, but I think they do exist for other European languages. So Nuacht Mhall is slow news, and it's a podcast we put out once a week, and you can hear 3 news stories read slowly from that week. So it's something I started during the lockdown with my old gang in London, and we have different presenters every week. So you can hear a range of accents and dialects as well. And we always label that in the title of the episode, so it's clear if someone is from Aistear or Tyrone or Mayo. So that's good for people who are kind of wanting to brush up on that. And I suppose the idea from me is that it's really useful because most materials out there are quite directed at the beginner. And then a lot of other resources are directed at people who were quite fluent already. This is something that's more in the middle there. I've seen it recommended a lot. People say listening is difficult. I don't understand when people are talking. Yeah. The problem with listening is that you don't have time. If you're reading something, you can stop and you can read at your own pace. But if someone is speaking, you've got to follow them or you lose it altogether. So that's one of the problems with listening. And then with Irish and listening, we do have different accents. We've got 3 different dialects. You might have learned it one way and then other people say it a different way to you. So really what everybody needs is more experience and practice with listening. You got to just give your your ears that kind of time with it. When I first moved to Dublin, I wasn't really that used to Munster and Connacht Irish, and I struggled with it, to be honest. Now I love to hear them, but it did take me a while to get used to them as well. So yeah, that's the drive behind Nuacht Mhall. It's something where people who are not complete beginners, but also not completely fluent, can go. I saw it advised a lot on the likes of Twitter that you know, if you want to improve your listening, just listen to Radio na Gaeltacht. But that's a big ask. Radio na Gaeltacht is for the Gaeltacht. The speakers are native speakers. They're speaking quickly, and they're not trying to accommodate learners, to be honest, because it's just a radio station. So it's not so easy for beginners. And Nuacht Mhall is slow. And we include a script, and there's a short glossary with every episode. And because it's Seachtain na Gaeilge at the moment, we're also doing a special series where we're releasing one episode every day from the 1st of March until the 17th of March this year. So we're not doing the topical news every day. We're doing a special series, Cochram and Lay, which is on this day in history. So just a special bonus series, which is going on at the moment.
And where can people find Nuacht Mhall?
You can find Nuacht Mhall on any podcast provider, I think, including Spotify, for example, is the most famous one. If you do an internet search on Nuacht Mhall, I think we'll come up. So you'll find us quickly. We're on social media. We're definitely on Twitter. I'm not sure about the other ones.
Perfect. So that's NUachtMhall. I really respect that, Niall, because it's a project is hard to get off the ground, and it's hard to be consistent with it. And you've obviously got like the creative drive, I would say, to get something out like that. And you're a real part of the Irish language ecosystem. Like, I hugely respect that. So Mahu. Okay, so Niall, your role at Bitesize Irish, you're an Irish language learning content developer, which is like you're developing content to help people learn the Irish language. And when this interview goes out in a week's time, on the week of St. Patrick's Day 2022, we're launching a new learning platform at Bitesize Irish called Aistear, which means journey. And we've for years spoken about the language learning journey. I find it intriguing, like the idea of like a voyage or a long distance trip, right? You take it at a good measured pace, but you have to keep going as well. And there might not be a destination, as in the journey is the destination. And there's hundreds of quotes of that type of thing. So that's the idea with our platform, Aistear, where we're going to house our newly developed Irish learning language content. And having it online makes it possible for us to develop quite interactive content. So with thousands of audio recordings, with videos, and indeed quizzes and the such that you've been developing, Niall. So what Niall has been developing is our foundational course called Tús Maith. Niall, would you like to introduce what is Tús Maith?
Yeah, Tús Maith is, as you said, the new foundational course. It's 10 modules of self-study lessons. It's based on the old bite-sized courses, so some of the material has been reused or developed or changed, but there's also a lot of new material as well. And you know, again, I love the image of Aistear because you don't learn a language in a night. It's got to take time. It is a journey. It's a very appropriate word, I think. And Tús Maith means a good start. It's from the old Shanachal, Tús Maith Lat na Hibre. A good start is half the work. So, as we all know from the school days, the worst thing about doing your essay for homework was actually getting started. And once it sort of flows then. So we're hoping Tús Maith is that good beginning for you too. Yeah, so it's a beginning course, and it's a self-study course, so it's not everything in itself. That should be clear. But we do have lots of audio, lots of natural examples, and a more interactive element with quizzes and so on within the lessons themselves.
What I loved about your approach, Niall, and like decisions we made in developing this new course, it's modern, it's practical. So we've taken a fresh approach. We've looked at the content we had, as you said, and taken a new eye to this. So it's modern. It's using words in the most modern Irish, and there's like conversation, role playing lessons in there, where you've created conversations for the learner to practice in their own time. Listen to the audio, play it, and repeat if you can. We have slow and fast recordings, and the situations are quite practical and day to day. So Niall, you mentioned that there's 10 modules. How did you approach creating different themes or topics for each of those different modules, and what's in them?
Well, the 10 modules they all have a different theme or topic, and they all relate to both vocabulary and topics that are useful in one area, but also to the kinds of the grammatical structures that would be relevant to that. So we have one module that's called At the Weekend, I think. And so, what do you do at the weekend? There's lots of vocabulary about your free time and about taking it easy or doing the gardening, things like that. But we also use that as an opportunity to bring in the past tense. That's where the past tense comes in Tús Maith. So you can imagine the very natural conversation on a Monday morning where you say to your colleagues, well, how was your weekend? What did you do at the weekend? So there, the grammar and the vocab are really related to each other in a very natural context. And it's not highfalutin poetry or anything like that. It's everyday conversation, the sort of language that you want to use. And that will help you cover all of the basics for, language that relates to your everyday life, and all the basics of the grammar too.
For somebody who works through Tús Maith at their own pace, what would you expect for them to have achieved once they've worked through Tús Maith? Where will they have gotten to?
Well, I think just thinking about the topics covered, in terms of grammar, they'll have practiced the verbs to be, the verb is and the verb be, and as well as that, they'll have got into present tense and past tense. And by the end of the course, there's talk of the future. So those are big areas. So I always feel we need to get those three tenses covered to have a really good grounding in Irish, and then later we can look at Mo Canílach and so on. Mo Canílach, the conditional mood gets a bad press sometimes. It's not so difficult. The problem is you just need to do it fourth. You can't do it first, because it really makes sense after doing present, past, and future. It's just the logical order. So people come to it later, and then they feel it's more difficult. But I think that's only because we don't get so much practice of it. So anyway, I'm getting on to another topic. So in Tús Maith, it's really the beginning. So we're not getting into the very advanced topics. We don't dive into an Mo Canílach or the Antishal Ginnajoch, really. But it's those beginner stages, and the topics relate to home, family, work, free time, travel, weather, all of those familiar topics about everyday things which are important to you.
For somebody like we've discussed this at length, where to position it, who to make it for. And if you're an absolute beginner who has never touched the Irish language, you grew up outside of Ireland, but you've a real interest in it, it might be a little advanced for you. But I would challenge people to take it all the same. You might see it differently, Neil.
I think they could definitely try it, especially in the first module, the beginning lessons. They are very bite-sized, and I would encourage them to have a go anyway. Sure.
So going to this journey, the Aistear metaphor as well, our existing content called Bitesize Coursey. It's a separate platform, older platform. And the general feedback that we got over the last several years was there was a bit of a lack of structure. It's like, okay, I'm in there. Now what do I do? Where do I go? So Neil, your content developed in Tús Maith goes from module 1 to 10, and within each of those about 10 lessons each. And there's a logical order of what you address in module 1, then you move on to module 2. So it guides you, it gives you like a starting point. You start at lesson 1. And for that, I suppose the absolute beginner is placed in the right place. And you can ask us questions. You're not alone. And it is for members of Bitesize Irish. We should be clear about that too. We've got several hundred members, and we're really looking forward to making this available to them. Neil, for somebody who grew up in Ireland, so they have school Irish, or they have exposure to the language, and they probably have more Irish within them than they realize. That's what I typically see. Yeah. How can Tús Maith help that person who's like refound or found a love of the language and they're coming back to Gaeilge?
Yeah. So as I said before, I do think a beginner could set about Tús Maith and get on very well. But I think it could also be good for someone who's returning to the language. And my experience teaching in Dublin and in London is that most people who are returning to the language are very hard on themselves, and they tend to say, "Oh, I don't know anything, and I can't remember. I used to know a little bit. I forgot it all," and things like that. So, but really, they've got a lot more, and maybe just takes a little bit of practice to get comfortable again. And that's something we always need is practice. It's not just study. It's also practice. So it's not just about learning the rule. You have to kind of be using the rule and applying the rule, for example, or the vocab or whatever it is. So Tús Maith, if you're a complete beginner, you could be going through it at your own pace, taking your time. But if you're someone who's returning, you could do the same materials, but you can go at your pace, and it might be a good bit quicker because you're more comfortable with it. It's more familiar to you. So we all need that kind of practice, just the time with the language, the experience to build up and get more comfortable and recognize patterns. So I think that's where Tús Maith is good for the returner. Let's say is that they'll be going through the same stuff, but they can do it quicker at their own pace, and then they'll get on to I suppose more advanced topics, and I'm sure there's something new in there for everybody.
Yeah, so on that, if I'm already an Irish language learner and I've been studying it quite actively, maybe I'm attending a class already, how can Tús Maith help me?
Well, it's always good, I think, when you're studying a language, it's also good to tackle it on different fronts. Okay, a lot of people are familiar with gamified learning on applications and things like that on your phone, and And I always think, why not? I use them myself. I don't think you can learn a language only through that one way. And obviously I'm going to recommend my podcast, Nuacht Mhall, but I don't think it's the only way to learn a language. I think it's one aspect. So if we've got here and here and here, different ways to do it. So if you've got a class, a conversation class that's based on speaking, that's fantastic. But Tús Maith could also be a great supplement to that, where it is self-study. So you do it yourself in your own time, and you can listen to the recording and listen again and say it out loud, practice that, make sure it gets comfortable in your mouth. And, it can be a little bit nervy sometimes saying things out loud in front of other people, because you're all afraid we might make a mistake. But the thing about it is that things are easier for you to pronounce and say if you've said them before. My example was always the expression thank you in English and in French, Italian. Any language you probably know the word thank you. And you probably don't know the word thank you in languages that you don't speak, because you went to that country one time and it was the one phrase you use. So thank you is always the phrase that people are really comfortable with because we use it more. And that just shows you that if you repeat something, say it enough times, then it just falls out of your mouth like it's easy to say. And eventually you'll be amazed that something that really took a lot of concentration to pronounce becomes really easy in second nature, because I suppose there's physical organs going on here with your throat and your mouth and your tongue and lips and everything. So it's muscle memory, I guess. So in Tús Maith, you're not on the spotlight in front of other people. You're studying at your own leisure and your own convenience, and you can add to that. And one thing that you mentioned before, Eoin, was about some of the topics and languages, a little bit more about modern life and modern Ireland, and especially for people who are returning to the language. There's there are words that I studied at school that we don't really use anymore. A word like banaltra for nurse. And I met someone at a pop-up Gaeltacht in London about 5 years ago, and I said, "What do you do?" Came past the target, and she said, "Is ultra me." And I didn't understand her off the bat, because we don't say banaltra anymore. There's no reason to say ban to specify that it's a woman. So ultra is the word. So anyone who was studying Irish at school, maybe before 2000, let's say, you probably have banaltra, but in modern Irish, we say ultra. So there are other new words for new aspects of life, technology and other things. So yeah, it's a great supplement if you're studying elsewhere.
Fantastic. And you introduced the idea of a reference pack, an Aistear reference pack that sits outside the Tús Maith course, but it's available also to members who will be members of Aistear at Bitesize Irish. So what is the idea of the reference pack compared to a course that I'm going through?
Yeah, well, as we said, one of the main things about Tús Maith is that there's a progression through it. And we start at number 1 and we go to number 10. And we don't really throw in examples of the past tense in module 2, because it doesn't come in until module 5 or 6. And then after that, we assume that you're comfortable with past tense. So there's a progression through it. However, there are topics that are important at every level. One of the main examples is the initial mutations, shevu and uru. You need to use that if you're a beginner. You need to use that if you're intermediate, if you're advanced. And, you know, it's something that everyone needs a reminding of the rules from time to time. So that's important to everyone. And whether you're in module 1 or module 6 or module 10, maybe you need a little reminder of, actually, what are those rules again? I just need to check. So rather than searching through Tús Maith again and trying to think, was it the lesson about food or was it the lesson about work? We know we have the reference pack, and that has that kind of basic information, not related to any other topic about daily life, and it's just more the bare information, nicely, clearly explained, that you need to know. So that's why we call it the reference pack. It's not part of this progression. It's relevant to anyone at any level. At the moment, we have the course about the initial mutations, but we are really hoping to put more courses to that as well, and so that whenever we mention Antishal Ginajach or any other challenging topic, we'll be able to refer back to that, and it'll be at your fingertips, I suppose.
Very nice. And I'd like to put this in a bigger context as well, because there's going to be more on Aistear. Our popular course is Sing a Song in Irish, where Siobhan brings you through reading and understanding 3 traditional Irish language songs, and then you get to learn the song iteratively. I think learning through song is very interesting because a song gives you the structure. It's like this set of words that you can go through. So there's multiple videos on each of the 3 songs. We have the popular Crack Irish pronunciation with our pronunciation cheat sheets. And we've got Bitesize Bio scripts. So for our Grow members, they have access to Aistear, all the Irish language learning content, it's kind of self-study. Also, they get an invite to our private learners community, Bitesize Pubble. And on Bitesize Pubble, we post daily challenges where you're not just like learning the Irish language, learning words, but you're trying to put it into practice. You're trying to be active about it. So those challenges challenge you to use your Irish. Gaeilge gach lá. And every week we hold Bitesize Bio on Bitesize Pubble. It's a live Zoom call to practice scripted conversation. So it's not open conversation. It's something that's more of a starting point or more foundational, where it gets you to practice a conversation in a role-playing way with the script in front of you. So you're getting to practice to say these typical phrases aloud, setting you up for more natural conversation later. And on Aistear, we're going to have 3 new conversations that we've developed. Siobhan has written them. It was quite fun. We did the role play at our team meetings, going through the scripts and reviewing them. So that was a bit of crack as well. So those 3 new conversations will be part of Aistear, and they'll be featured for Grow members who are taking part in Bitesize Bio. So I'm really looking forward to that too. Niall, we've kind of described how somebody can approach learning the foundational parts of the Irish language with Bitesize Irish through Tús Maith, which is launching with Aistear. Maybe more generally, like learning principles. One at Bitesize Irish is Gaeilge gach lá, where it's one kind of part of the recipe. You're exposing yourself to the Irish language every day, and you're making the Irish language part of who you are. You're trying to expose yourself, as in listen to it, but also use and practice it if possible. Niall, what would your take on this be? You can't just immerse yourself, say, in Radio na Gaeltacht and expect to learn a language. So how would you approach describing this to someone who wants to like break through a bit and learn more of the Irish language?
Yeah, well, it's natural at the beginning, I suppose. When we're starting out, we focus more on what we call receptive skills, so reading and listening, because in a sense you don't need to do anything apart from to understand. But really, the main step is everyone wants to speak, so that's really an important thing. And speaking and writing are the productive skills, where you have to be creative in a way. You have to put your own words out there. So it's a whole other step. You know, it's definitely more challenging. But you everyone knows we all want to speak, so we do practice that. And if you're starting to learn or coming back to learn, it's possible you may not know a lot of other learners, and hopefully through Bitesize Pubble, for example, you can meet other people. But one thing is that people often feel like there's no opportunity to practice and so on. But there are little ways that you can do it. Before I met my gang of people to the pop-up Gaeltacht in London, I was keeping my own notes on my phone in Irish, for example, my to-do lists and my other things that I needed to remember. I just was trying to do that in Irish, and my shopping list was a good one, because I was always challenged to come up with to find the new vocabulary that I didn't know already. So that was just a good opportunity to go to folklore and find those words and to learn those words. So any little way that you can use it, even if it's just practicing with the dog and saying good morning, how are you to the dog, and so on, or even to your family, even if they don't speak Irish, you can throw in some words and nice and expressions. Maybe not a full conversation, but there are ways that you can use it. So it's very important, I think, to activate the learning, activate the language that you've learned. And we don't want it to be too passive an experience where you're sitting there expecting the language to just wash over you. And, that it's good to be immersed, and the word immersion is used a lot in language learning, and it's got that sort of sense of it's all around you. But you have to actively use it as well. And if that's in one of those simple ways, maybe to begin just with the dog or in your phone or something. But going beyond that, that's where your Circle Cora or pop-up Gaeltacht, and those events are often online these days as well. And even with the lockdowns coming to an end in places, I think online events will definitely, they're a part of life now, aren't they? So there are ways to use your Irish, and I always tell people as well to follow your own interests through the language. So if you're into music or sport or history or politics or any other topic, there are people you can follow on social media. There are websites and books and television programs, and TG Cahir probably relating to that. So if it feels a bit less like study and a bit more like something you like doing in your free time anyway, then that's a great way to improve your Irish.
I like it, yeah, because you can come across content that somebody will advise you to take to work through, and it just might not talk to your curiosity.
Sure, we all have different tastes and interests and all of that to a degree. So I know about a group at home in County Tyrone who are putting on some sessions at the moment or in the near future, which are specifically focused at sports commentary in Irish, because TG Cahir show a lot of rugby, a lot of Gaelic football, a lot of hurling, and a lot of people are watching who don't even really speak Irish. But all the commentary, all the trachtaracht is as Gaeilge.
And rugby as well.
Yeah, rugby, I think I mentioned. And so all of those phrases and things like that, people are watching anyway. They might as well understand. So I think that's a great idea and a great opportunity for people to engage with the language. Engagement is something where you can invest a bit of your energy and a bit of your heart and a bit of your time with something that you really care about. Then the language will be more meaningful as well. It's not just a little extra. It's something more central in your life.
I love it. Niall, I think we'll leave it at that. I want to say Gurmila Mahagut, you've shown your love for the language and your internal drive to help people learn the Irish language. And I think somebody who's watched or listened to this interview can hear that and can see it. What would you hope for the Irish language in Ireland? Is it more of the same? Is it more active in some way? Do you have a personal vision like that for the Irish language?
I would say I am more positive and hopeful and optimistic than I was when I was young. And yeah, as I described, I loved it when I was young too. But I think the last few years have shown the real passion that people have, and that came out of, or partly at least, came out of online activities, some very famous podcasts and social media groups and things like that. And the pop-up Gaeltacht I've mentioned a few times as one of those, but there are other ones too. And I think this love for the Irish language has been a little bit. I wouldn't say it was dormant. It was there, but it wasn't so visible. And that's the thing. When everyone else can see, and that was one of the motivations of the guys who created the pop-up Gaeltacht, is to say that we do exist actually, and we want to be out in public and be visible. And I was at the first pop-up Gaeltacht in Dublin for 2 years there, and that was last Thursday, and there were hundreds of people there speaking Irish. It was actually to the point where there were too many people there. You know? It was difficult. No one could get to the bar, for example, which was a tragedy. But that's the kind of situation. That interest and love was always there. That gra was always there. He wasn't so visible, so it was easy for certain characters in the media and in the establishment to kind of say nobody speaks, nobody cares, nobody wants it. It's completely untrue. And I think there are certain schemes underway and plans officially, and there are lots of campaigns at the moment where people are trying to reinforce the position of the language and have it more visible and make it just a little bit easier for anyone who's interested to get involved. Make it easier to learn, easier to practice, easier to know that if you're in Ireland and you want to go to a shop or go to a bar or go to a restaurant and use Irish, that you'll be able to find out where you can go and do that comfortably. Because it's a big risk, isn't it? If you go into a bar and you think, I'm going to practice my Irish, but you're a bit nervy that other people may not respond to you. So, yeah, I think there's been amazing changes, and especially the Gael Stolana. It's really great for the future. We do need to look after the Gaeltacht. We need a lot more. The Gaeltacht is the home of the Irish language, to be honest, and they've got such a sivris, such a wealth of language and expressions and so on. So we really need to protect that, to make sure that people from the Gaeltacht can continue to live there and to keep the language bio there. But the language is also growing really fast in Dublin and Belfast and places which are not traditional Irish language strongholds. And that's also fantastic to see. So, yeah, I'm more positive than I would have been 20 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
And so I hope that trend continues, and we get opportunities to develop it even more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel the same way, Neil. So, Gurmina Mahaga, thanks so much for taking the time for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Good.
So you can find Nuacht Mhall, which is Neil's podcast, online. Do seek it out. And at Bitesize Irish, if you're watching this before St. Patrick's Day 2022, we're launching that week our new platform, Aistear, and Neil's developed course, Tús Maith, that we've been talking about. Where can you find it? You can come to bitesize.irish, our website, where there'll be information from the homepage. You can subscribe to our channel, Bitesize Irish, on YouTube, where we'll have several live events with the launch of Aistear. Really looking forward to it. And I feel privileged to help take content such as what Neil has developed to more Irish language learners within Ireland and outside of Ireland. Really looking forward to it, and we'll see you there. Okay, slán a chairde, slán Neil.